So we also did a lot of interviews for our research. We talked to defense and prosecuting attorneys, judges, jail and JDC administrators and staff, and a wide range of juvenile justice specialists in lots of different areas. And we also got to talk to the residents at Green Hill JRA. So these are young men that we talked to who are all declined juveniles who've been to both jails and JDCs throughout the state. After gathering our data, we found that there are really no easy answers to the questions we were asking, especially the question of where is the best place to hold declined juveniles. We found there's a huge variation from county to county in housing conditions. This is primarily due to differences in resources, differences in facilities, and the fact that there is no one statewide set of policies for housing declined juveniles. We found that the Green Hill residents had different opinions than we expected them to have on where the best place to house juveniles was. And we had expectations going in based on national statistics that ended up not being what they had told us. And we also found that there are huge management issues no matter where you hold declined juveniles, whether that's jails or JDCs. So again, our question was, what is it like to be housed in a jail? We all wanted to look at that question as well as the other option, which is the JDC. In order to do that, we went and we observed how juveniles are housed from our visits in King and Pierce County adult and juvenile facilities. And we went to the juvenile detention centers in both counties, and we found that in both of them, in King and Pierce counties, juveniles are held in individual cells in small units, which have an open common space with tables, large windows and natural light, and rooms against the back walls surrounding this common space. In the King County Regional Justice Center, so in the jail, we found that juveniles were in units with other adults, but they had their own cells. In other words, that's called being in general population, so they're housed with adults. The Pierce County Jail, juveniles are held separately from adults in two small holding tanks designed for juveniles. And what a tank is, it's a small room with a few bunks. It has a table and a TV. In Pierce County, these tanks had metal bars for 3 out of 4 of the walls, so that meant that you could still see and hear the adults who were in the general population. These juveniles are only got to leave their tanks for a few hours for school every week, and then for 2 hours of rec per week. And then recently they've had in Pierce County too many juveniles, so some of the youth are forced to stay in isolation units, which means that they only have about an hour where they get to go out of these units. They don't get to interact with the other juveniles. Pierce County rotates juveniles who are in there right now so that they're not, there's no 1 or 2 people who are constantly in isolation, but they may be in the isolation units for long periods of time. We also wanted to look at what kind of programming and services are available for youth. And again, we're looking primarily at King and Pierce counties, which we decided to do because, first of all, we have easy access to those counties, but also they account for over half of the juveniles housed in Washington State. So this is what a majority of the juveniles in Washington State experience for programming and services. We found that with both the jails and the JDCs, they have health services, they have options for resident recreation, and they have volunteer chaplains who provide religious services. But we found some pretty big differences between jails and JDCs as far as education was available. So at the King County JDC, teachers from Seattle Public Schools come and they teach social skills, life skills, reading, math, and PE every day of the week for 40 minutes a day for each of those subjects. Whereas at the RGC in Kent, so that's the jail in Kent, they only teach reading, math, and life skills, and it's for quite a bit less time than they would get at a JDC. And it's mostly to prepare for their GED if they choose to take it, or in Pierce County they do offer, in some situations, credit towards a high school diploma. The JDC felt a lot more like an actual school. They had actual classrooms, they had access to a library. In Seattle JDC, they have a branch of Seattle Public Libraries there in the JDC. They have access to computers and textbooks, whereas at the jails it was more just like sort of an empty room where you go in with a teacher. We think that a great area for further research would be how these small counties deal with educating their juveniles. because they may only have one or two at a time. So it would be interesting to see, like what do they do for education when you don't have people in there that frequently who need it. And now we're going to head over to Imu, who's going to talk about our experience talking to Green Hill residents.
So at the beginning of our research, we looked at nationwide statistics just to get a better understanding of the juvenile experience in jails. And here we found some very disturbing high risk rates of physical and sexual abuse, including suicide for juveniles in these adult jails. They were 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in an adult facility compared to a juvenile facility. And even a very brief stay at these adult jails had dangerous consequences. 48% of juvenile suicides actually happened in the first week, and 14% of those actually happened on the very first day. However, nationwide statistics aside, we kind of focused on Washington State and what the experience was for juveniles here in our state and what differences there were. In order to do that, we interviewed some youth from Green Hill who had experienced both jail and the JDC. And these residents we interviewed actually came from 8 different counties. So they give us a very good broad range of perspectives and experiences as the actual faces behind these bars. And very surprisingly, an overwhelming majority of them actually preferred the adult jail to the JDC. And I think by looking directly at these quotes, we can get a better understanding of how they came to those conclusions. This individual stated that I needed somebody to tell me what to do and how to handle my emotions. That had a lot of potential. And if I was to stop after this, I wouldn't have to be like them. And this desire to have older inmates that could be positive influences on them was actually very common, as a lot of them felt like they needed some sort of guidance through this life process. This individual stated, when you're looking at a long time with people in the JDC, looking at a couple of weeks, it gets stressful. So I'd rather prefer being around people in my time range. It's more comfortable. Many residents who stayed for months felt that jail provided this comfortable and relatable environment that the JDC actually could not provide. But because we interviewed these residents with their peers, we honestly could not tell if possibly they were hiding their scare of physical and sexual abuse that may have been going on during this time. But as a group, we do believe that these inmates saw legitimate benefits to the jail over the JDC. That possibly the higher risk of abuse could possibly be outweighed by these other positive factors that they discovered. However, it is important to note that while they did prefer jail to the JDC, they ultimately did prefer the JRI over everything else. So with these conflicting conclusions, we're once again unable to find any easy answers, especially on how to properly house and manage juveniles, which Mark will go deeper into.
As Imo mentioned, no matter where you keep these juveniles, there are going to be issues on the management side. And these issues really fall specifically to issues in adult facilities and issues in juvenile facilities. In adult facilities, they're pretty fairly confident that they can house these juveniles in a safe way in which they will serve their time accordingly. The problem, though, is that there are some Washington state laws which are vague and sometimes counterintuitive, and so they're oftentimes confused about how they should best implement these policies for the benefit of the youth. One of these is sight and sound separation. So in Washington state, it's required that a youth be separated by sight and sound from adult inmates after sentencing. This is after sentencing, not before sentencing. This is a contradiction that a lot of jail administrators really found puzzling. They thought it'd make more sense to separate these juveniles before instead of after. How they hold these juveniles for their own safety is also a question that jails really struggled with. King County usually puts them in general population within the jail. We also saw jails use such strategies as putting them in their own separate pods or putting them together in tanks. Though when we talked to a couple of jail administrators, some of them voiced concerns about juveniles acting out more when they're around their peers and when they're around people who they feel that they need to impress. And the third option that some jails took was isolation. And through this, we learned that isolation is not the best thing for a juvenile to be in, and really that's one of the things that in our policy recommendations we try to do our best to avoid a situation happening at all. There are also rare cases which really pose a significant challenge to adult facilities. One of these rare cases that we saw in Pierce County was that there was a female juvenile who was in maximum security. This posed a very interesting situation because they didn't have anyone who was her gender and who had as much of a security need as she did. So what ended up happening is they had to put her in isolation within a medical unit in order to keep her safe and to keep her in a properly housed facility. Such rare cases like these are reasons that we thought, in our policy recommendations, it might be better to have a more uniform policy to house all juveniles in jail.